Hello guys, and welcome back to another video of whatever comes to my mind. Today is a very important day. It's Pi Day. So for all the nerds out there, let us talk numbers. Particularly, let's take a moment to talk dollars. And since the channel's name is Dollar Bill, let us talk about an appropriate topic of UBI. That's right, money. Everybody loves money. Specifically, let us discuss UBI in more detail and show the history and the idea of how it works. So let's talk UBI. UBI stands for Universal Basic Income. It's a simple idea. Give everyone in society an X amount of dollars. Hence the universal part. It has several roots and initially was debated in the early 20s to 30s, particularly as that era saw a huge influx of social and economic changes. This was the post-World War I period after all, and saw Europe and its economic and social future in flux as the empires of that continent had waned, particularly the post-imperial world. Well, kinda post-imperial world, because you still had France and jolly old England with their tropes of colonies, but that will be a topic for another day. The second major debate around the idea of UBI came around in the 60s to early 70s, right around during the time of Lyndon B. Johnson's term. He famously declared the war on poverty, and liberalism was in full swing. And one can see that from the historical perspective that with wide sweeping changes, like adding Medicare and having the Civil Rights Act passing in the 60s, universal healthcare could have been sought as to been just right around the corner, with UBI right behind it. Yeah, well, we can all dream, can't we? That was just a mirage. And with Nixon in power, he quite literally, in the early 70s, started to nix all the universal programs that country was trying to come up with at that time. I guess his administration wasn't a complete failure. The Nixon administration did establish the EPA, passed the Clean Air and Water Acts, and though they also did kind of start the war on drugs, which by a modern lexicon would make Nixon a tree-hugging, drug-hating, anti-government communist or whatever, I guess. Now, just a quick little side note, I am not partisan or particularly political as far as my own personal beliefs. I genuinely despise politics and politicians, and I do believe us to be living in a modern bizarro land. But I do enjoy history and economics, which is why the overlap is so interesting to me, because the granddaddy of all economic conservatism, who is Milton Friedman, pictured right here, was one of the biggest advocates for universal basic income. Milton Friedman was also Ronald Reagan's advisor during both of his terms in the 80s, advised Barry Goldwater, Richard Nixon, and Margaret Thatcher, prominent conservative economical politicians. Reagan also, later in his life, gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, as we can scroll down here, see this right here. And he, for those of you that doubt whether or not Milton Friedman was a conservative at his time, we can read the following quote right here. "I am a libertarian with a small l and a Republican with a capital R. And I am a Republican with a capital R on the grounds of expediency, not on principle." That is given Milton Friedman's economic leanings when it comes to the issues with whom he aligned with Republicans the most. And if we go over out here, this is what I really want to talk about, is his support for UBI, which is cited right here. Milton Friedman, world-famous economist, supported UBI by reasoning that it would help reduce poverty, he said. The virtue, as he's quoted here, is precisely that it treats everyone the same way. There's none of this unfortunate discrimination amongst people. And the reason I wanted to talk about Milton Friedman is because I wanted people to understand that this is an economic solution and should not be viewed as a partisan one. Now, although Milton Friedman did attach himself to the conservative or Republican Party, and I know a lot of folks who tell me all the time whenever I talk about this issue with them that this is some crazy liberal hippie bullshit idea that will make people lazy. And my answer is, no, it doesn't, because it's not really a liberal idea at all, as we just presented the evidence here, and it's actually more of a conservative libertarian one, which emerges from the idea of a negative tax. So let's talk about a negative tax rate and try to understand how it works. So in this example, let's say that we set a threshold of $10,000 that we want to use. Say society agrees that $10,000 is what everybody should be making in order to not go hungry. Well, if let's say then somebody makes $9,000, their effective tax rate would be negative $1,000. At the end of the year, when they file their taxes or do whatever else in this instance, they would receive $1,000 to make it so that on a year in net income, they would make $10,000. And then everybody who makes over $10,000 would be taxed a low flat rate of, let's say, 5 or 10 or 12%. Let's use 12% in this example. So for every dollar you make over $10,000, you get taxed 12 cents on every dollar. You make below $10,000, you get taxed at zero. Okay, it seems relatively straightforward. With people then making above $10,000 in the threshold would be contributing to try to help the floor of society reach up to that $10,000 mark, and so on and so forth. This is not exactly a UBI, and is actually more kind of like in lines with like a means-tested version of a UBI, but it would have a similar effect on poverty as Milton first mentioned, and he was a big proponent of a negative tax. So if this is Milton Friedman's idea, one could argue that he really wasn't that much of a conservative, but I would retort and say that yes, he really was, and he really is the founder of modern economic conservative theory, with quotes like this when it came down to talking about the post office, an idea that privatization and free markets would be better fitted to serve a public good. So let's read the quote right now. There is no way to justify our present public monopoly of the post office. It may be argued that the carrying of mail is a technical monopoly and that a government monopoly is the least of evils. Along these lines, one could perhaps justify a government post office, but not the present law, which makes it illegal for anybody else to carry the mail. If the delivery of mail is a technical monopoly, no one else will be able to succeed in competition with the government. If it is not, there is no reason why the government should be engaged in it. The only way to find out is to leave other people free to enter. As I said, this hits on all points of modern conservative economical theory. Deregulation, privatization, don't have the government compete with private business and just leave the government out of everything. As I said, this hits on all of the foundation. And this is where it makes me think, and I will argue that UBI is more of a libertarian and conservative idea because ultimately, UBI gives the individual, or a negative tax rate, the ultimate choice. Because when you give people money, you also give people the freedom to spend it. No questions asked. That's libertarianism, which is embedded in modern conservatism. Government shouldn't be telling people how to spend money. The people should. And if you're not hurting anyone, who gives a shit what you spend it on? That's the ultimate point of libertarianism. Now, I know one of the biggest and maybe some of the more joke-worthy arguments that people are going to make against giving other people money is, well, if you're going to give people the money, they're going to go out there and buy drugs and cigarettes because that's what poor, irresponsible people do. To which I say, if you can't afford food, and spend your food money on drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes, well, bud, you're not going to be around for a second check. Last I checked, meth had no nutritional value. And people that are that desperate and that stupid will find a way to get money regardless, probably by stealing shit. If anything, applying the same logic, UBI is a crime reduction program because the truly desperate aren't out there trying to rob people and sell their stolen goods, or engage in prostitution or wherever other insipidness that we could come up with. Now, in the spirit of fairness, there is, however, one major flaw with UBI and negative taxes, which made it hard to implement or consider in the 20s or the 30s, and made it more practical and palatable in the 60s and the 70s, and that is the idea of scarcity. You can give people all the money you want, but if you can't produce the goods that the people need, the money isn't going to help because inflation will destroy any economic efforts you make. So generally, the threshold has to be below an economic level of the average citizen. Hence why UBI is viewed as a poverty reduction program and not a solution for the upper or middle classes. Now, Milton Friedman and modern-day economics general and UBI proponent Andrew Yang see the exact same thing I see today, at least as far as the United States goes, and that is the United States has a high level of resource productivity and economic development, and that there's absolutely no reason why you can't establish an economic floor. We just produce too damn much, and we generate a lot of waste doing it. So let me give you a concrete example of this, and since I love evidence, let me read you some key paragraphs here from The Hill, talking about food waste and how food waste has increased dramatically despite hunger. And here it says in the first paragraph, it seems like a paradox. 50 million Americans are hungry, yet 40% of food produced in the United States goes to waste. In fact, this paradox illuminates chronic problems in our nation's industrial food system. So, why is this food going to waste? Well, because people aren't buying it. Well, why aren't people buying it? Because they don't have money. How can you solve that problem? You give people money to buy the food that you're going to throw out in the trash can for no reason whatsoever. So there's clear market, 50 million people who could use this resource of UBI to just go out there and buy food, right? And as I mentioned previously, they're not going to spend it on drugs and money because they're hungry. So it makes sense that UBI would help solve this issue. But then there's also a second point that helps with this problem, and this is a paragraph right down here that talks about how it actually affects climate change. So overproduction also contributes to climate change. Consider this: if global food waste had the status of a country, it would rank third behind China and the United States in greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, climate change poses new threats to agriculture. Rising temperatures and unpredictable weather events will only worsen farmers' ability to successfully harvest crop. So we're over harvesting, we're wasting the food, but we don't want to give the poor people money to just go buy that food because we'd rather throw it in the trash can. Genius! Genius! So now that we know that the issue isn't of resources that we have at our disposal, we know that it's just an issue of the political will that it takes to implement a simple universal program. Which ironically would be stupidly easy because it's universal and it doesn't require much administration. Everyone just gets a check. Simple as that. Spend it on whatever you want because that's the ultimate goal of economic conservative libertarianism. So, and there's another point here as well, talking about how there's this looming idea of automation, which will eventually push people out of jobs. And UBI kind of begins to solve for that as well in this conundrum. But I will save that conversation for another day. Now, don't get me wrong, I will definitely be jumping into the weeds in this issue a lot more because, for one, I don't see the conversation about UBI going away anytime soon. Especially with all the technological advances and all the things that are happening around the world and how, just how popular this economic idea is and how just simple it is. I mean, it really hinges on the most simplest solution. Just give people money and let them sort out their own problems. I mean, this is exactly the kind of things that Milton Friedman advocated. Give people money and don't let the government get involved because people will find a way to solve their own issues. And if they can't, then their issues are probably not going to be solved by the government intervening in the first place, which makes sense. As I said, very limited role, just give people cash. Simple. And it follows a simple idea of Occam's razor. By the way, if you're curious, this is what Occam's razor is. Occam's razor is a problem-solving principle that, quote, entities should not be multiplied without necessity, end quote. Or more simply, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. Well, what's simpler than UBI, as we've talked about so far? Well, yeah, I guess there could be other more simple solutions, such as not doing anything. That's always a solution or an action in of itself. But that is not what this channel is about. We talk about solutions over here. And if you've made it this far, I love each and every one of you. Thank you for being a part of this channel, a part of this community. Be sure to like and subscribe. This has been your host, Dollar Bill, and I will talk to all of you later.